Yeah, I was gonna actually had a question lined up to ask you if you took inspiration from Flash. So when I was in
Yeah.
high school, I did a lot of stuff in Flash, and it's like seems like there was like an early part of like the 2000s internet that was just a lot of Flash interactions and animations and these like really interesting dynamic websites that were also really heavy and very clunky, right? They took forever to load. The internet was slow. The assets were large.
Yeah, the format was proprietary. It didn't run well on Macs at all. I mean, even before the whole, Apple drama, like it was almost a joke trying to run Flash on a Mac. And then they got the Intel processors and it started getting actually a little more serious and functional. But it was always felt like it was a bit, yeah, performance issue. But yeah, so absolutely, like Flash was a huge inspiration for us. And we actually worked on one of the customers I was talking about. One of the first customers when we moved to the US was Macromedia. Later became Adobe. We built some of the features that shipped in Flash CS2 or CS3, I think. Our company was hired to build like the first kind of components that shipped with Flash, like the scroll bars and scroll panes and all the little like components that you would use in Flash. Um, that was, yeah, one of our first big customers here in the US. And to this day, my and Luigi's name appear in the Adobe Animate. Flash is now Adobe Animate. You load up the credits and scroll through all the names, I think we're still in there.
Wow.
And so, yeah, Flash was definitely a huge part of that. And I think what we like to say about Flash that did really well, and that kind of was this vision for the future, I think, was that it empowered designers to build the actual graphics that run in the final product. Um, Whereas even today, like we've kind of gone backwards a bit there, where like we're working in design tools that help designers kind of define a vision of what the product is. The final job of building the product is left to engineers now. All that work has to be rebuilt, and that's what I mean by hard coded. Like if it's going to go, you can design a cool button as part of your design system, but then an engineer has to build it on the web. Another engineer has to build it in iOS. Another engineer has to build it on Android. Like it all has to get hard coded, and our design tools now help us convert those graphics to code. Like they give us, dev mode and red lines and guidelines and all these, docs to help define how it should be converted to code. And yeah, we see it a little differently, and it's inspired a lot from Flash, which was the idea that the designer gets to build a format that actually runs as opposed to, just a mock-up or a prototype.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating space. You see it at the like sort of smaller level with tools like Webflow, right? Is like, and again, these tools existed forever ago. You had like Dreamweaver, like, here's a WYSIWYG site builder. The technology for those have gotten better. So Webflow, there's a lot of people who are like publishing, actual, product sites with Webflow. But the interesting thing here is like there is a little bit of a limitation in like what these things can do, and animations, or especially interactive animations, always seem to be left sort of to the last mile, and it takes a really sort of crack team to like bring those together, because a lot of engineers get to the point of like the designer sharing their vision of this animation, or maybe they've went through Adobe After Effects or something and actually like done the animation, and they're showing them like a video of like, okay, this is what I want. Engineers just sitting there.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we've retweeted those jokes to the designer vision engineers over here sweating trying to look at it. I forget the exact meme, but yeah, TikTok popular video. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think we're looking at it a little differently from like the Webflows and the framers and all. Like they're very different spaces, as similar as it is the concept that empower designers. I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do as tool builders. Those guys are building, they're focusing very much on like one kind of platform, which is the web. They're helping designers build a vision that then gets converted, or behind the scenes is using the same constraints to build it in code, and basically create a website. With Rive, yeah, animation is a part of that, like you were saying, and it takes a lot of effort. And the vision was different, and complementary, I think, to all those platforms, because we want to work with all those platforms too. So what we really started with was and this was Luigi, my co-founder, this was his concept, was like there needs to be a new format that kind of just rejects everything we've accepted about graphics formats today. we don't want to have to adhere to an SVG spec or any other thing, with all these legacy features and also things that were generally built, as like PNGs, SVGs, even video. They were built to like define graphics at rest, and like kind of like a byproduct of print. Even film, video is just a sequence of frames that is meant to be printed on film. It's not really interactive. And the part that feels like the disconnect of why we need this new format is that majority of what designers will design today is going to run on software. Like none of it is going to get printed, or very little of it is actually going to be printed. If it does get printed, it's like a a side quest or a much smaller use case of what the design is initially built for. And so it started with like, okay, what does a format from the future look like? Like just like jump, 5-10 years in the future, and what would we want to have if we were, designing then? And then work backwards from what do you need to support all of that. And yeah, the format needs to be purpose built to change state every frame. And that means that it's state driven. The graphics format can change state. And if it can do it every frame, it means it can animate. And that's where, animation looks really exciting and really cool with Rive, is because the format was built to do that right off the bat. Then it needs to have an editor that is built specifically to create just that format and be interactive. And then it needs a runtime, which is kind of the libraries that we have that let you, basically give you an API to manipulate that graphics format, that new format on any platform, whether it's the web, Android, iOS, game engines like Unity or Unreal. To be ubiquitous, you have to have, the ability to run on all those platforms. If you're creating a new graphics format, it has to be ubiquitous, right? And the final piece of the puzzle of like this whole insane endeavor of this building a whole new pipeline was the renderer. There needed to be a new renderer that's part of that runtime that is super performant and can actually accelerate vector graphics, which is something that has never been possible on the GPU. GPUs accelerate triangles. They don't know how to accelerate curves. But that's not to say no one has attempted to. There are vector graphics renderers that have been attempted, but I don't think anyone has looked at it as holistically as we have, and has built a solution as performant and feature rich as we have, that basically can emulate any design that you can do in any other design tool today, but it's hardware accelerated and super performant and allows you to fill the screen with vector graphics. And so all of those things had to come together. There's a lot more. There's a text engine behind it that is very novel and had to kind of be reinvented from scratch. But is like you're getting at a really kind of crazy endeavor to go after. Took much longer than we initially thought to build out this whole pipeline. But now that we're here and we have the new renderer everywhere, we're at a spot where we can start seeing like, okay, there's new features we're going to be releasing soon that no one's ever seen design tools do. And that's really exciting about the future, because we have that whole pipeline and we can bring it ubiquitously everywhere. We can suddenly start giving designers superpowers that hasn't been possible. I mean, the design tools and constraints have kind of stayed the same for the last 20, 15 years,
Yeah, it's so cool that you guys are designing like that, designing for the future of formats. Cause like I think a lot of people have often wondered, like, why isn't there just one format to go across all the renderers and like let me build an app in nice ways? Like this conversation reminds me a lot of React. I don't know if you know what React is, but it has a very similar like ethos.
Yeah, I'm the designer of the two twins, so less. But I mean, I know React. I use the first version of Rive that me and Luigi built was I did all the front end in React. Luigi did all the hardcore graphics. But yeah, very very familiar with React.
Yeah, but it gives me like this similar vibe of like I can render one thing one way, put it across many platforms, and like speed up development. Taking that a level higher and kind of going beyond code seems super interesting to me. How far beyond it do you go though? Like you have runtime renderers. How like specific to the runtime are they? Like,
so yeah, good question. So we initially supported multiple renderers, and we still do. The runtime still has this philosophy of bring your own renderer. So for example, on iOS, you can choose to still use core graphics instead of the Rive renderer. And there's some cases where you have to do that, like to plug into certain parts of iOS and Android, and I think Vision Pro. There's some parts that like need core graphics. Like if you're trying, for example, to render a Rive animation in the dock, which you might have seen recently, that app that went viral, Banana Bin. Did you see that? It had like the flies, in your dock, like flying around. I think MKBHD like shared it, and we saw it and it was like, oh, cool, that's fun. And then like a few weeks later, we realized, oh, that was built with Rive. The creator like tagged us and said this was Rive. So like there's some cases like that where yeah, you just can't bring your own renderer. You have to use the built-in native render or the core graphics on the platform render. So yeah, Rive definitely supports that, and that's something that will always be part of the runtime options. But the new renderer we developed is the advantage of it is that it gives you like a level playing field across everything. You can know that like it's not like if you use a blur, it might look one way on Android and one way on iOS, and it might not even work on the web because Canvas 2D might not even support blurs or whatever feature you're trying to use. Inner outer strokes. People have asked us, why don't you have inner and outer strokes? It's like, well, like Canvas doesn't have a concept of inner and outer stroke. And so, yeah, that's part of like why initially it was like this huge ordeal to like build this runtime that would support all these different renders. But we realized that we needed to build also our own renderer. That's kind of the best in class way to render Rive content. And that's why we still recommend it. When possible, you should use it because the performance gains are huge. Memory consumption is lower, and you get all the feature set that Rive supports. Like I was getting at, we have a new feature launching soon. That's like, we call it, I think this is going to be the first time I reveal it. We're calling it feathering, nothing particularly crazy, but it's kind of a new way to feather the edges of strokes and paths, creating glow and kind of blur and shadow effects, but using our novel rendering algorithm, which again is all open source and you can go see how it works. But it's going to be like a new way to do shadows without having to do multiple, and this is where I get a bit out of my element, but like without multiple draw calls and all that. And it's super fast. So you can kind of blur the edges of a bunch of paths and not get any real performance impact. And so that's the type of stuff that you need our renderer to be able to use it.